Good morning everybody, welcome to the latest edition of Dev Superpowers. My name is Damian Brady and I'll be talking to you today about Visual Studio Online. So we've had a look at a few topics so far around development of software, particularly MVC, Web API, what else have we got, SignalR, Bootstrap, things like that. We haven't really talked yet about how you manage your work, your development work. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Now, Team Foundation Server for a lot of companies has been around for a long time and has been used for a long time, and it's a great product for managing your source control and also managing your work. But for smaller teams and for smaller companies, it was difficult to justify the cost and the time for maintenance and installation and the infrastructure itself. So in about 2012. Microsoft released Team Foundation Service, and this was a cloud-hosted version of Team Foundation Server, multi-tenanted. Basically meant that you didn't have to manage any of that infrastructure or maintenance or any of that stuff. It was renamed to Visual Studio Online shortly afterwards as well. So it's pretty much the easiest way to get started on Team Foundation Server, and so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about how to get started. I'm going to talk about the source control side of Team Foundation Server a bit, and Visual Studio Online specifically. We're going to have a look at some of the Agile management and collaboration tools that are in there for your teams. And then we're going to run through how to actually develop using Visual Studio against Visual Studio Online. We're going to have a brief look at some of the testing capabilities that are on Visual Studio Online, specifically working with test case management and things like that. And we're going to really briefly touch on deployment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on deployment simply because there's an Azure talk coming up in the Dev Superpowers series that is specifically about continuous integration to Azure. So I won't talk too much about that. And finally, I'm just going to touch as well a little bit on monitoring. So there's a application insights product that is kind of linked to Visual Studio Online. So we'll have a look at what that can provide for you as well. But once again, that's almost a talk in itself. So so we won't drill into that a little bit. Won't drill into that too much. Now, just before we go any further, I just want to spend a little bit of time clearing up a couple of little misconceptions about what Team Foundation Server is. And this is a misconception that we get a lot when we visit customers as well, and particularly ones who are only using Team Foundation Server for their source control. What we find is that people basically liken Team Foundation Server to Team Foundation version control, and they don't separate those two concepts. So I just want to make it really clear that there's two sides basically to Team Foundation Server. There's the source control side and there's the Agile planning side as well. So on the source control side, until reasonably recently, I think it was in 2013, about January, towards the end of January, Brian Harry announced that Git was now a valid source control option for within Team Foundation Server. So there's really three options that you have now. There's Team Foundation version control with server workspaces, which means the server controls which workspaces have files open and which ones are being edited and things like that. That's the one most people think of, and that's the one where when you edit a file in Visual Studio, it has to contact Team Foundation Server to let it know that you're editing that file, and it can be a little bit chatty, and it doesn't work very well for if you're not online at the time. There's also local workspaces for Team Foundation version control, and what that means is that you don't need to be connected the whole time. So it's much more similar to some of the other source control mechanisms, where it's only when you go to check in does it work out what's been changed and what needs to be updated. So much better for working offline. But Git is, rather than the centralized version control of Team Foundation version control, Git is a distributed version control system. So you have your own local repositories and you push the changes up to the server and vice versa. So pull them down. So that's another completely legitimate, completely supported option within Team Foundation Server. But the source control is only half the story. The other side of the story, and in my opinion, probably the more important part of Team Foundation Server, is your Agile planning stuff. And that's your backlog management and your sprints and test cases and bugs and all of that work item stuff that basically controls what your team is doing at any one time. And then it gives you complete traceability from the work items that you're trying to do all the way back to the code that's actually being checked in and deployed and so on. So that's kind of the just that misconception I want to clear up. Team Foundation Server does not equal Team Foundation Version Control Server workspaces, which is what a lot of people think. All right, so enough of that. What we want to do, we want to walk through actually getting started with Team Foundation Server, or with Visual Studio Online specifically. So there's a couple of differences between the online version, Visual Studio Online, and the on-premises version. Mainly they're to do with limited customization. As you'd imagine, if you have your own version of Team Foundation Server on your own equipment, on your own servers, then you can do a lot more. Because this is cloud hosted, you don't have access to that server. So it means things like you can't modify your process templates. We'll have a look at process templates soon. And you can't do things like server plugins and stuff like that at the moment. And then there's the other side of it, the lab management, SQL reporting, and BI tools, and SharePoint for integration with Team Foundation Server. These three things you can't really do for pretty much the same reasons. You don't have access to the server, so you can't do those with Visual Studio Online. But on the flip side, what you do get is an update every 3 weeks. So if you've worked with Team Foundation Server in the past, you'd probably be familiar with the roughly 2-year cadence that they release a new version. So they'll release a new version of Team Foundation Server roughly every 24 months, and then maybe you get a major update, every year, for example, or every other year. So what has been happening lately is they've been targeting a new full version of the Team Foundation Server every 12 months. And then maybe 3 or 4 big updates during the year. So that cadence has really improved. That's the on-premises version of Team Foundation Server though. It's gone even harder with their Visual Studio Online, where they're basically doing a version every 3 weeks. And that means, because they don't have to worry about packaging that up into a product, it means that Visual Studio Online basically gets updates every 3 weeks. So you can see those updates as well. I'll just skip over to a browser. You can see those updates as well. If you go to visualstudio.com, been doing a lot of integration stuff lately. If you just go to visualstudio.com and have a look at news, and then there is a features timeline link just here. And so you can see all of these updates. So we can see 4th of September, which was a few weeks ago. We got work item query improvements, quick search through tree controls, all that sort of stuff. Now, you can see on the right, the server bit. That's basically, this is the server version, so the on-premises version. So these are scheduled for future updates. So basically, if you have Team Foundation Server on-premises, you don't have these features yet. But in the service, you do. So if you're using Visual Studio Online, you can kind of ignore this column. But you can see how frequently these are: 18th of August, 27th, 4th of September. And you can drill into these dates and have a look a little bit more at what's been updated. So this one's given us basically a bot in the team rooms, which we'll have a look at, some new charts, things like that. And they'll walk through all these changes and what they mean. So yeah, you can have a look at that if you want to know what their features timeline looks like as well. All right. So yes, you get updates really, really quickly if you're using Visual Studio Online. There's some awesome stuff that comes out. But to get started, so we'll have a look at that. To get started, you need a Microsoft account, so aka a Live ID or something along those lines, and that's it. You don't need anything else. So I'll have a look. Let's just kill this guy, and we'll go and have a look. I'll actually go to Internet Explorer, and once again, Visual Studio Online or visualstudio.com. And there's a Get Started for Free button. So I'm going to log in so I've clicked on that. I'm going to log in using an account that doesn't have a Visual Studio Online account assigned to it, just to show you what that process looks like. And I'm already signed in, so I'm just going to sign out first. So I'm going to sign in with an account that doesn't have a Visual Studio Online account, just to show you what that process is. I'm not going to go through the entire process though. I don't want to create an account if I don't need one, but I'll show you what it'll look like. So when you get started, provided it's signed me out, it'll give me this. I'm just going to choose Live ID. That's not my email address. And so it'll get me to log in, and then it'll ask me what I want to do here. So this is the page where I get to name my Visual Studio account. So I might want to call this, Dev Superpowers .visualstudio.com or something like that. And when I click account, it'll go away and it'll create an account for me for Visual Studio Online. Now, once again, I won't do this because I don't want an empty account that I'm not going to use. So I'm just going to flick over to Chrome where I'm already logged in and show you what it looks like. So this is the SSW one. We do have a lot of projects in here, but I've just hidden them at the moment. But this is what you'll see when you start up. Across the top, you'll see a lot of items dealing with learning more about Visual Studio Online. So those are pretty handy. The features that are there, pricing, different videos and online help and things like that. And then getting Visual Studio. So once you sign up, you actually, it'll give you the ability to download Visual Studio. So there's team rooms, which we'll talk about later. There's all this stuff around cloud load testing, integrating with third parties and so on. So that's I've done a lot of stuff around integration lately. I won't touch on that today, but we can point you at some other videos that will tell you about that. Application Insights we'll have a look at the end as well. And then there's some other dashboards to do with Application Insights. Once again, we'll have a look. But what we want to do first, we just want to create a new project. So this is kind of your first step. In Team Foundation Server, you have the concept of team project collections. In Visual Studio Online, you've only ever got one collection. And then you have the concept of team projects. So let's create a new team project. I'll just go to New, and we'll have a look at some of the stuff that it asked me. So project name is obvious, so let's call it Dev Superpowers .alm, just to show you. You can put in a description. I'll just leave that alone for the moment. And the next question we get asked is about a process template. So there's 3 that come out of the box. There's Visual Studio Scrum, MSF for Agile, and CMMI. So Scrum you might be familiar with as a process management or development management methodology, basically. It's an Agile method, and it's basically this template is designed around getting a Scrum team up and running really quickly. Agile is a bit more general. It refers to things a different way, but it can also be used for Scrum teams. It's just a bit different in how it handles things. And CMMI, which I believe stands for Capability Maturity, you know what? I'm going to look that up. Capability Maturity Model Integration. Obviously, we don't use that one very often because I don't even know what it stands for off the top of my head. But it's all about process improvement, and it's much more locked down, particularly useful for government organisations and larger organisations that really want to lock down their process. So you can choose that one if you want. Now, what these templates contain is a whole lot of different things about how your project will run once you're managing it. So Scrum, for example, just as an example, it defines the work item types. So Scrum will define a product backlog item, which is what you call a thing that you need to do or a feature that you need to implement. So in Scrum, that's called a product backlog item. In Agile, that's called a user story. And in CMMI, that'll be a requirement. Now, they're not one-to-one mappings, so there's different fields in the Scrum version than the Agile software development one and the CMMI ones. There's extra work items in CMMI, there's a lot more of them. But as well as that, it defines the states that those work items can be in, the transitions between those states, so all of those rules, who can create different things, so there's some security stuff, and also a lot of startup things like which iterations you start with, Any reporting, that's for the on-premises version, so the teams that are there by default, all this kind of stuff, which items appear on which boards and so on. In general, we use Scrum, so I'm just going to choose the Scrum one, and we'll have a look at what that template does, obviously, when we get started. And then our next one is choosing Team Foundation version control or Git. So I'm going to focus on Team Foundation version control now. Git is fully supported as well. However, the tooling isn't quite as good in Visual Studio at the moment. There's also a couple of things that aren't that I want to show you, like the My Work work through with Visual Studio that you can't do with Git at the moment. That's almost certainly going to be coming. One thing I will highlight here as well is once you've chosen a process template and a version control method, you're stuck for that team project. You can't migrate to a different one on Visual Studio Online. And in Visual Studio, the on-premises version, it's very, very, very hard to migrate. It can be done, but it's quite tough, particularly if you want to keep all your history. Alright, so I'm going to click Create Project, and it'll go away and it's going to create that project based on that process template. So what that means is it's going to set up the process template, like the work item types, the iterations that we need, the different teams, all that kind of stuff. And so it's going to let us get started that way. When that's been created, we're just going to go into some of the administration items, just to show you how some of this stuff gets set up. So, alright, our project has been created. Let's navigate to that project. And we can see right off the bat we get a few different sections here. I'm the only member, which is fine, but we can go and manage new members, add more people. I won't bother with that, that's pretty straightforward. And then we've got some pinned items and some details about the current sprints and things like that. There's not a lot in there at the moment, obviously, we haven't started. So let's configure some of these things. We'll configure these sprints and iterations. So to do that, we go up to the right here to Administer Account and click on that. It'll open another item here. And we can see we get a number of tabs across here. The important one here is the project profile. We have a list of our teams. So because I'm the only person on this project for this example, there's no point creating new teams, but it's very easy to create, for example, a test team, or you might have a database team, or you can set these up pretty much any way you want. So you can give them a name and a description, and then also give them a security group. I'm not going to go too much into security at the moment. Especially for Visual Studio Online and for small projects, it's better just to keep everybody with a high level of permissions. The other thing it does, and we'll have a look at areas in a sec, is to create an area for that team, which means that when you create a work item or when you're editing a work item, you can assign that work item to a particular area, which means that team will see that task in their backlog. Very useful for breaking up a large project into smaller items, so each team has their own backlog. There's a few other settings here as well, just administrators of that team and so on. I won't bother creating that at the moment, and we'll just skip to the next one. So iterations is basically the concept of a fixed period of time where you do some work. So if you're running Scrum in your organization, you'd be quite familiar with this, but they'd be called sprints. So that's what it's set up by default. If we were using Agile, that Agile process template, when this got configured, we'd probably end up with, it wouldn't be called sprints, it'd be called iterations, for example. So what we're doing here, the checkboxes are the ones that will appear in our backlog. So we'll just, we'll leave that there. And I want to set the dates for this. So I'm going to set the dates for sprint 1, and I'm going to set it from today. And I'll make it a 2-week sprint. So let's do that. So 23rd to the 6th to the 10th. So we'll save that and close it. And we can see we've got a start date and an end date. And that's important because it means that Visual Studio Online now knows what our current sprint is, it knows what past sprints are and future sprints and so on. And it lets us, it gives us a nice burn down chart as we start doing that work, which we'll have a look at. You can change these however you want. There's no rules around what you want to call your iterations or how many children you have in the items and so on. So you can do this however you want. Alright, so that's our iterations. We'll have a look at what that means a bit later. And then areas. So if we created another team, there'd be another area here as well. But we might want to break this down anyway into smaller items. So let's say our area might be UI. We might have another area for database, and then oops, that's going to be a child of database, and so another one of backend code or something. So you might want to separate your different work items into these different areas as well, and we'll it means that you can organize these things better. You can query them a lot more easily. So if you want to see all of your UI tasks, it's easy to make a query about that. So that's reasonably powerful as well. Alright, so I'm just going to stop there for the moment. I'm not going to mention security very much or alerts and so on. We just want to go through some of the process of actually doing this work. So let's have a look at our backlog. In Team Foundation Server and in Visual Studio Online, our backlog is basically our list of work that we need to do. Now in Visual Studio Online there is the concept of a hierarchy of these items. So our backlog is kind of our main list of things that we need to do, but fairly recently they released a features item as well. So that's a level above backlog items. So you might have a feature representing, you know, your I don't know, minimum viable product, for example. Or you might have a large set of requirements that represent a large feature as well. So that's what this is for. You notice as well there's this little drop down here for creating a new one, which makes it really easy to just press enter, type again and get these items. Yeah, so it's easy to add these things. If you click on one of those items, you can see some of the other fields that you can put in that item as well. So I'll assign this to me. We can see our iterations get exposed here as well. So we can see, we'll set this one to be sprint 1. And so that means it's going to appear in our sprint 1 sprint, basically. It's assigned to that sprint. I'm just going to leave the rest for the moment, save and close that, and we'll have a look at our backlog. So our backlog is the main area where we have our tasks. I'll add a few others, so we'll create a beautiful home page and we'll remove the contact page. So these are not very exciting work items, but they're there just to demonstrate. We'll go through and do these as we do some of the development. So what we can do is we can open these up now and have a look at some of the other details. So I'm going to assign this to myself again. I'm the only one in the team, but it will give you everybody in that Team Foundation service. So in Visual Studio Online that we have a few other projects, so there's a few other people in our list. If you've just started one of these, you'll be the only one there. The next field is effort. So if you're familiar with Scrum, you'll be familiar with the idea of story points. So this is basically where the story points go. So we're going to have a look at this guy and say it's about a 3. And what that means is it doesn't mean 3 hours, it means 3 story points, which is a relative size of 3 compared to all the other things we're doing. I won't go into this too much. There's a lot of literature out there about estimation and all of that kind of stuff. But what it means in general is I'm just deciding that this is the arbitrary amount of work that we need to put in for this item. And I'll show you how that works when I put in the one for the next one. Business value basically represents how much value the business is going to get out of this item, so how important it is to the business. So the product owner at least should be able to fill this out and say, well, this one is really important, I'm going to make that 100. Once again, no real rules around what numbers you put in here. You can make it 1 to 3, you can make it 1 to 1,000, you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to make that 100, that's pretty important. Obviously there's a description, so traditionally, especially in Agile projects, you have this format of as a something or other, I want to so that I can, and you fill that out. So this gives you, it's useful in terms of Agile projects because it gives you not just the item that you want to do, but it gives you a bit of context around why and what problem you're trying to solve by implementing this project. It makes it much easier for a developer to know when they might be going in the wrong direction, or when they're doing the right thing, when they might want to make a suggestion to the product owner, things like that. So we'll put that in as a first time user. I want to see a nice home page so that I can for example. The other one, which I think is arguably much more important, is your acceptance criteria. And this should be filled out really by your product owner, or on your product owner's behalf. And this should represent the description of when you can consider this item done. So in this case, we want to say, for example, creating a beautiful homepage would be, it should be at least one image, some welcome text, for example, and no lorem ipsum. So basically that means when a developer finishes this task or this work item, they should be able to check these guys off and say, yes, I've done that, and everything's been checked off, the product owner is going to be happy. That's why it's important to get this right. You don't want a situation where the developer can mark all these as done and then not have, and the product owner comes back and says, you haven't finished this work properly. So I want to make sure that that's accurate. And you want to have positive items and some negative items as well, just to make sure you've covered all the bases. So we'll leave that at the moment. We'll save and close that one. And then we'll go and edit the next one. So double click on that guy. I'm going to assign that to me as well. Now the effort, removing the contact page is pretty simple. And in comparison to our 3 that we put for creating that beautiful homepage, this is a bit less work. So we're going to say if that one's a 3, this one's a 1. So you can see how that starts to work. The idea behind this really is that once you get a bit of a pattern going and a bit of a velocity that your team works at, you can say, in general, we complete X number of story points per sprint. And that's a great way of being able to kind of extrapolate and say, at the moment, we think at the rate we're going, we're probably going to finish these items, by this date. But once again, it's really important to stress that that's just an estimate. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and things will always go wrong. So this is just a way of being able to get an idea of how far through a project you are. Once again, the business value, this isn't as important. We'll make that 50. I'm going to skip these guys, and we'll just save and close that. So now we have these 2 items. These are on our backlog at the moment, but what we really want to do is we want to put them into our current sprint. If we have a look at our current sprint, we can see there's nothing in there. So this is the work that we're doing at the moment. We'll go back to our backlog, and the easiest way to put these in our sprint is just to click and drag them. So I'm going to drop both of these into our current sprint, and you can see the iteration path here gets changed. And then our contact page, I'm going to put that on there as well. And we'll go to our sprint, and we can see these 2 items. Now you can stop here if you want, or you can break them down. So these are product backlog items in Scrum. You can also add tasks underneath these product backlog items. And there's a good reason for doing that. It works a lot better when we go to the My Work page. When you finish that work and check in your code and link to the item and check it in, you can mark these as done as you go. So I'll show you that in a sec. So the 2 things we needed to do for this home page were to put an image on the front page. and we'll just say image and welcome text. So again, I don't have to break these down in any particular way. It's completely up to me. I've decided that I'm going to do all of these three tasks here in one hit, so that I don't have to worry about too many different tasks. But I could break these down into individuals. Once again, I'm going to assign this to me, and now I'm going to look at remaining work. So remaining work, this is where we start talking about hours in general. And this gives us a nice burn down. If we fill all of these tasks out at the start of your sprint, which is an ideal scenario, and put in the remaining work, so our estimated work for all of these items, then as we go through and mark these things off, we get a nice burn down chart of where we're tracking in that sprint. And I'll show you an example a little bit later. So I'm just gonna fake this. Obviously it's not gonna take this long, but we're gonna say that'll take 3 hours. Backlog priority, I wouldn't worry about it too much. You can put it in if you're going to have a lot of tasks, but I generally will leave that alone. You can also choose an activity, so deployment, design, development, things like that. Again, I'm going to leave that alone. And here's where we have our area. So in this case, we're doing some UI. Once again, you don't have to do this, but this will make it a bit easier to break these guys down and query. Run queries on them and things like that. Alright, so that's really all we need to do at the moment. The other thing which was added a little while ago was tags. So these can be pretty handy for just putting ideas around this. So I might put MVP, I'll put so minimum viable product. I might put I don't know, content, something like that. So you can put whatever you want on these. It's useful for managing that kind of thing. You can query on these as well as of quite recently, so you can break these guys down in your queries. So we'll save and close that, and now we can see we have this put an image on the front page as a task underneath here. I'm going to do the same just with the remove the contact page. So remove link and link and page itself, assign it to me. I'm going to say there's an hour left on that one, and that's a UI as well. So now we've got these two backlog items and we've got these two tasks here, and they've all been assigned to me. We can see on the right here as well that we've got 4 hours of work for our team. 4 hours are unassigned, and 4 hours, sorry, there's where are we? There's 4 hours unassigned and 4 hours assigned to me, which is a bit unusual. I'm not sure what's going on there. But I'm just gonna flick to the capacity item over here. And this, again, this is optional, you don't need to do this, but we're gonna say, for example, that I'm available for, just to make it a bit more realistic, we're going to say I'm available for 0.2 hours per day, and we've got these 10 work hours, let's say half an hour per day, just so we have them under our limit. So you can see once I start assigning this capacity, you can see our team has 4 or 5 hours, so half an hour per day over 10 days is going to be 5 hours. So we've got 4 hours of work, and there's 5 hours available. If we drop that down, obviously, then we're over utilized. So there's too much work for our team. We can also, if you wanted to use the activities, you can say I'm doing design work and then break it down even further. So by activity. Sorry, that's what was happening before. So this is by activity. We're not actually doing any of these. So there's deployment work, so we can say I'm doing deployment work, and there's 4 hours that are unassigned to any particular activity because I didn't use that. I'm going to leave that alone. You can put days off in there as well, so if there's public holidays, you can do them for your entire team here, or individuals who have days off and things like that, you can put them in there. So that's pretty useful for capacity planning, to work out whether you've got too much work for your team. But once again, you don't have to use this. I'll save that. We'll come back to our backlog. So we can see we've got these 4 hours of work. I'm under how much I need, and we're all right here. Okay, so that's our sprint. If we go back to our backlog here, you can see there's a couple of options just up the top here. There's a backlog and a board. So we're looking at the backlog, which is just our list of items in kind of a grid view. I'll just collapse this. We can change our column options as well to put different columns in there if we want. So that gives us a bit of control over that. But the other view that you might want to look at is the board view. And the board view gives us the nice kind of backlog board that a lot of teams have and have traditionally done with post-it notes and things like that. So this gives us the ability to grab these guys and drag them into different items. Now, I mentioned before the process template has certain rules around what you can do, the transitions between states. So I can't drag this to done. That's not allowed. I can drag it to done. There you go. We can go from new to done. I think it transitions through. So if we have a look at the history of that item, we can see it actually went new to done. Okay, so there you go. There is a rule. You can move from new to done. Learn something every day. Obviously, I don't do that very often. If you're using something like Kanban, this board is really handy for this as well. So you can start moving these items across between the different tasks. And you can see there's like a 0 out of 5 for the approved and committed. This is kind of a Kanban concept as well of limited work in progress. You can customize all this stuff as well to say the work in progress limit is 5 for this. So that was the 0 out of 5 that we saw. And you can also say how many work items you're going to see. That's a very recent update, so only 4th of September that came in. You can add new items as well. So let's say you wanted to have a testing item in here. So you can have another column for testing, but you only get the ability to have states that exist in your process template. So if I drag something into testing, it's still going to stay in committed. So that's, yeah, there's a limited amount of customization you can do there. All right, so we'll just say okay on that guy. It hasn't actually changed anything. Similarly, when you go to a sprint, you get these backlog items in your board view as well. So on the left, you can see the product backlog items themselves, and in the columns, you can see your actual tasks. You get an additional little benefit here. You can click on that and change it to anybody else who's in this sprint. Same thing with the hours. You can click on that and change the remaining hours, which is really handy for when you're doing your daily scrum or your stand-up, if you want to call it that. You can have a look at these items and then change those on the fly. You can also filter on the person as well. So I could see just mine or all of them. Doesn't work so well if there's only one person in the group, obviously, in the team. And you can group it by backlog items or by people. So we're having a look at backlog items before, but if we group it by people, we can see all of my tasks and so on. All right. The other thing, there's a few more filters over here. So we can turn the work details on and off. So that's just that column. In the backlog, we've actually got a few more. So we can turn our forecasting on, and that means if we know that we're working, we're doing 10 user stories. 10. What are we calling them? 10 points or story points per sprint. We can say based on a velocity of 10 per sprint, which sprints are we going to finish these guys at? So everything fits into the first sprint, but if we said our velocity was 2, actually let's make it 3, then we can see that one will finish in the first sprint or the next sprint, and then we'll have to go into a new sprint and so on. So this is forecasting. It's really important to know that this is just an estimate. It depends on how accurate these guys are, and it depends on all sorts of other stuff that you can't predict up front. So it's useful for giving you a pretty high level of when you think you're going to finish stuff, but it's important not to tell your managers that this is when we are going to finish this work as well. The other thing is the mapping. So we mentioned features before. we can see all our different features, and we can map these guys to these features the same way, just by dragging and dropping. So both of these, let's say they belong to our minimum viable product feature. And I'll show you how you can view that in a second. We'll just turn that off for the moment. We can show or hide our in progress items. So if we drag those to in progress, let's just do that. We'll say we're going to start doing our beautiful homepage, and then flip back to our backlog once that saves. And then we can turn that off. Oh, sorry, it needs to be in committed. So we're going to do that. So basically approved means yes, you can start working on this, and committed generally means yes, we are absolutely going to do that work. And so now that guy won't appear anymore. So we can only see our backlog of things that that aren't running at the moment. And finally, this view here, we can have a look at backlog items or backlog items to features and tasks, and then we can see our hierarchy that we created by dragging those into the minimum viable product. You can do it the other way around as well, so have a look at the similar view as the sprint itself. So backlog items to tasks. I like leaving this at backlog items, it keeps it at that high level. Or if I'm using features, sometimes I'll go to backlog items to features as well. Alright, so we've mentioned teams as well. We're going to have a look at the sprints. So we've seen those guys. There's a couple of new little things like being able to email the backlog query, creating a query from here, so you can have a look at that a bit later. And also there's a nice new full screen mode, which is useful, particularly for the board. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to actually work with this from Visual Studio itself. So let's flick to Visual Studio, and the first thing I want to do is go to our Team Explorer tab, and I want to connect to ssw.visualstudio.com. So what you do the first time when you came in here, you have to click on your Connect to Team Projects button here. And then you can say select team project and set up your connections over here. So I've already got this one set up, but if you didn't, you could click on servers and then add a new one. So it might be something like mycompany.visualstudio.com. And what that'll do is it'll connect to that Team Foundation server. If you do this, it'll ask you for credentials as well. So just as an example, if you click on OK there, it'll ask me to sign in, so it knows how to connect and so on. So this is what you get in general. We'll just cancel all of that because we've got our ssw.visualstudio one. Close that. Now at this point, what you want to do is you want to connect to, there's only one collection as I mentioned on Visual Studio Online, but we want to connect to our one that we just created. So I need to remember what I called it. It was devsuperpowers.alm. So let's connect to that guy. So we'll say connect, and it'll go ahead and connect to it. So there we go. Now we're connected to DevSuperpowers. So let's do a file new project the way that most of the other guys have been doing it. So file new project, we'll make it an ASP.NET Web application. We'll make it our really important folder, and we'll call it Dev Superpowers. Now I can tick this box to add to source control, and if you're starting a new project, that's an excellent way to go. But just to demonstrate, I'm going to uncheck that, and I'll show you how to add it a bit later. And we'll create a directory for that solution. That's fine. So I'm going to create that. It's going to be an MVC application. We'll use individual user accounts. Yeah, that's fine. Now, if our account is linked to Azure as well, I can just click host in the cloud and set it up as a website, and that deployment kind of just works. I'll unclick that at the moment just so we don't have to worry about that, and click OK. So that'll do our standard kind of going away, creating a project, and we'll start working once that's been created. So The items that we want to do, so we're doing this beautiful homepage. We want to put an image on the front page and get rid of the lorem ipsum and things like that. So in Visual Studio, once that starts up, we're going to say that we're going to work on that task, we're going to do some work, and then we're going to check it in against that task, and I'll show you what happens as a result. Okay, so we've got our new project. That's great. So the first thing we want to do is we want to check it into source control. So let's turn that guy off. If I can, we'll pause it. Right, so what I want to do is right click on solution and say add solution to source control. So because we're already connected, it already knows how we want to do it. We're going to choose Team Foundation version control, which is what we chose for our project, and that just tells it, it lets it know which ones we're going to have available. So if we'd chosen Git, we wouldn't have seen this Dev Superpowers one. We would have seen a different set of projects, because we'd only see the ones that are using Git. Because we connected to it, it's already given us this Dev Superpowers ALM. So let's do that. We'll call it Dev Superpowers and say OK. And now we should be able to see the little icons when that sorts itself out to say we've added this, we've added these files. If we go over to Team View, go Home, and look at our pending changes, we'll be able to see there's all of these included changes here. So these are all the things that we're going to add. Now I'm just going to say initial commit here is that comment, and check that in. So it's going to go and check in 219 items now. Now you'll notice I haven't assigned this to a work item. So this work that I've done now, basically being checking in the first project, I haven't assigned it to a work item. And the main reason is it's kind of our first commit. That first one, it's not that important, I suppose, to put it against a work item. Everything you do after that point though, it's probably a good idea to put it against a work item. And that means that when you go and have a look at your code and all of these different check-ins, so these commits or check-ins or change sets, you can see that you've, you can see the actual code that's changed as a result, and you can also see what item you were trying to complete, so what work item you were working on at the time, which is great for traceability, and I'll show you that in a minute. So we'll just wait for that to finalize, just so we have a project in there. And I'll show you over here, you can actually see this, these changes. If you have a look at code, the code menu in Visual Studio Online for that project, you should be able to see all the code that exists. Right now, because it hasn't finalized, we've only got this build process templates. When that finishes, there we go, successfully checked in. I'll just refresh this page, and we should be able to see more code under here. There we go. So now we've got our Dev Superpowers solution folder, and we can see all the files that are in there. If we have a look at change sets, we can see the actual commits that occurred. Now there's a few others that occurred kind of as a result of setting this stuff up. Build automation and lab default templates and all that sort of stuff as well. And then our initial commit. If we choose one of these, so our initial commit, we can see all the items that changed. So all of these were added, so it's not going to show us much on the comparison page over here, but you do get some nice syntax highlighting and things like that, so you can actually work with these pretty well. The other thing you get is the ability to add little inline comments. So you might want to add a comment here saying why wasn't this minified, for example, and that's a lightweight code comment that exists in Team Foundation Server or in Visual Studio Online now, where you can see people can discuss the code that was already committed without even using Visual Studio, so that's pretty powerful as well. Alright, let's skip back to Visual Studio now, and we'll have a look at doing some actual work. Let's go back to Home, and we're going to go to My Work. So In my work, this shows you all the stuff that you're doing and all the stuff that you've suspended and so on. Suspensions of work and so on is almost a whole talk in itself, so we'll just leave that alone. And we're going to say there's our create a beautiful homepage product backlog item, and then these tasks as well. So let's just start with this task, put an image on the front page, and we'll drag it up to our in progress. So let's drag it and drop it there. So what we're basically saying is we are going to do this work now. You can drill into these as well, so if you double click you get a very similar UI to what you had before. So you can see this is image and welcome text, and to remove any lorem ipsum. It's up to you whether you want to do the actual product backlog item and the task. In general I'll only do the task, but I'll have a look at the product backlog item and say, right, well, this is what we need to do. There should be at least one image, some welcome text, and no lorem ipsum. Alright, so we're doing this work now. So let's go back to our solution. We'll go to our homepage view, so home index, and let's just change the contents that's in here. So I'll just minify that and collapse it a bit, and we'll get rid of all of this stuff. So I'm going to get rid of that header bit. I'm going to put some welcome text in there. If you looked at the bootstrap stuff, you'd know what I was doing here. So basically I'm saying this is the full width. Welcome to Dev Superpowers. We'll get rid of all of this stuff, and we'll get rid of that, and then everything down here as well. Okay, so we've got a basic text. The other item we wanted to do was to add an image. So let's just take that, we'll put it inside that paragraph. Image. And we're going to say this can be one of my favorites websites, philmurray.com, and then we'll make it like 400 by 500, for example. I think I've got that right. So that's our image. Let's just test this out, just to make sure I've actually got that image correct. And so we'll get a, we should get our welcome page. Because I was on that index, it's going to do this, which should be fine. That will also be defaulted, as you'd probably be aware from MVC, so we don't actually need to put those two items in there. So that's just spinning up, and hopefully we should be able to see our Bill Murray image as well as our welcome text. It's taking its sweet time, which is good. Everything's alright. IS Express is being slow. There we go. So there we've got our image as well and our welcome text. So as far as I can tell in here, according to our Team Explorer, according to this create a beautiful homepage, have we marked all these things off? It should be at least one image, some welcome text, no lorem ipsum. So image, welcome text, no lorem ipsum. Looks good to me. I'm happy to check that in. So let's stop that. And let's check that in. So let's go back to our Team Explorer. And we can click on check in here, or we can go to pending changes. So I'm going to click on check in. We can see our related work item is already set because we used the My Work walkthrough, and we can see the files that we've changed as well. By default, if it's a task, it'll set that to resolve that task. So if we have a look in our backlog, so let's go back to the work tab and have a look in our sprint, in our board, we can see just by saying we were doing that work, this is moved to in progress. If I then check this in and set this guy to resolve, or leave this as resolve, this task should go all the way to done. And we should, so in other words, you don't need to jump back into Visual Studio Online, the web access tool, to do that. So let's do that. Add an image and text on that page. So let's check that in. So this should be a bit quicker because we've only got the one file. So we're going to check that in, and then once that's completed, there we go, done. we'll refresh this page and we should see that item is now in done and there's 0 hours remaining instead of 3. And so that's basically how you'll work. You'll start grabbing these things and moving them over and so on. What that doesn't do though is set our backlog tasks. So with the backlog we can still see that that's committed, but we need to drag that to done to get that to complete completely. And it's not bad that it does this. The backlog is generally good for identifying which things you've done during a sprint. So at the end of the sprint you can go through and say, are all the tasks under this guy done? Yes, great, that one's done, let's move on. If they're not all done, then you can move that backlog item into the next sprint to prepare for the next bit of work you're doing. Okay, a couple more things that I want to mention before we finish up. So I mentioned teams as well. So there's an awesome feature in here called team rooms. So let's just click over to home. And we can see over here our team rooms. So let's click on that. Basically every time you create a team, there'll be a team room created as well. So this is our dev superpowers.alm team room, and it's got me in it. And this is basically just a live chat, fantastic for working with remote guys. And what that'll do is it'll let you talk to different people. You can also do Twitter style targeting people, and they'll get a notification when that happens in here. And you can also do some awesome things in here, like get notified of events that occur during the normal day-to-day operations. So when a build completes, you can get that to notify you. When anybody checks code in by anybody in a team or by a specific person or anything like that, when any work item updates are updated. So let's add that one actually. So let's say anybody in a room member under the area path of Dev Superpowers, let's be notified of that. What about code reviews? We won't go into that. Pull request as well for Git. So let's just leave it at that. So when we get a work item being updated under that. So I'll just show you what that looks like. So we've just set that up. Let's go back to our page. So let's just open it over here. I'm just going to do a new one. This is our home page for Visual Studio. So let's go to Dev Superpowers. And we'll go to our work tab, and just to demonstrate this, I'm going to move this to approved. We should see when that saves, we should get a notification in here. That's not working at the moment. So a work item is created or an existing work item as a state or assignment changed. Okay, so that did happen in the background. It just took a little bit. So we can see we get that notification from Visual Studio Online. One of the recent updates is a little tool called Hubot. So I haven't actually used this. So yeah, so I'm going to leave that alone. That's one of the things that happened in the most recent update. So that's pretty cool. What it means is you can basically ask this little tool to do some stuff. So let's see if we can find out how to do it while we're here. So Hubot. So how do we do it? Oh, we need to add our own one as well. So let's leave that alone. That would be pretty cool. So basically it means that you can ask it to do some things. So you can see in their example, it says Hubot VSO create bug error in latest service code. So it'll go away and do some work for you straight from that chat room. We'll leave that alone. So we can see, that's basically how we've done our work, how we've done all that kind of stuff. What I want to show you though, there's an item over here which is our burn down for that sprint. Now because I just created this, there's no real indication of what that's going to look like. So I'll just flip over to one that we've already got for the Event Cinemas project. And you can see with one of their sprints that they've done, here's their burn down. So what this is the number of hours at the start that's your ideal trend, is that line, and you can see they slipped a little bit behind but still had a downward trend of the work that they were doing. This is the remaining work field that it gets from the tasks, all of the tasks that are in that sprint. So it's really handy for seeing how you're tracking as you go through, and that'll update every day, so you can see how that's working. The other thing you can see in the backlog items is another graph which is really useful for if you're using like a Kanban style model, and this is like your cumulative flow. Now there's not a good example in here because I think they've just been leaving everything in there as either new or approved, but you can see the number of work items and how that's tracking in terms of you know, which ones have moved to approved, committed and done, and so on. So that's another pretty useful item. The other guy which can be quite useful is the velocity. So we've only got one sprint, and so far we've completed 3 story points. So that's what we've got in here. As we track through, we'll see a few of these sprints and we'll get an idea of how fast we're doing these items. So that's pretty useful as well. All right. So just quickly, a couple of things that we want to look at as well. So testing as well. There's a great UI for looking at test items here. So you can create new test plans. You can run the tests using either MTM, so Microsoft Test Manager, or just a web project. I won't go into that too much. This can be a talk in and of itself, basically. But it means that you can assign tests to work items and then have your testers go through those tests and so on. So you get that complete traceability for those. There's also the other things I was going to mention. Let's have a look over here. We've got testing, so deployment. I mentioned that very briefly, but let's wait until the Azure presentation to do much on that. Basically, you can tie these up with Azure like we saw when we created the project to actually do that deployment. And when you do that, you'll end up with some stuff in this build column here. So you can have a look at your queued builds, the completed builds, the ones that have been deployed, and so on. That's a really powerful feature for looking at. So for actually deploying your projects to Windows Azure as well, Microsoft Azure. So that's pretty handy. And finally, I just want to show you some of the monitoring. So if we skip back over to our home page here, so let's go to Visual Studio Online, and we'll have a look at this application insights. Now I won't go into how to set this up. Once again, there are other videos and so on that you can have a look at to do that, but we'll just have a look at, for example, our SSW Time Pro. This gives you kind of Google Analytics style analytics of how your application is running. It's much more powerful than that though. It'll actually give you details about exceptions that have been occurring, some performance events, so things taking too long, you know, availability, things like that. You can set up you know, pings to particular URLs and conditions about when they you know, when you should be notified when stuff's going wrong, the performance of your application, usage, so when people are actually using the application, and then some diagnostics around errors and things like that, so metrics around what stuff's happening, exception rates and so on. So if we go into the overview, this is really good for debugging as well. So let's go to the Time Pro one and have a look at the exception events. So you could have a look at this and decide, oh, there's all these exceptions that are occurring, and you can drill into these. So for example, this event here, this exception that's occurred, you can have a look at a lot of the details around what's going on. So this is a 500 error. You can have a look at the actual exception itself, almost as if you were looking in code. Stack traces, all this kind of stuff. Really, really powerful for debugging and making sure your application is running okay. So that's a really powerful tool as well. We won't go into that too much. There's some fantastic videos on Channel 9 and some other places as well, which go through that in a bit more detail. Alright, So we have had a look at how to get started with Visual Studio Online. We've had a look at the source control options, Team Foundation, version control, and Git. The Agile management tools, which is basically your whole workflow around what work items you have, what states they can move to, things like that. Collaboration in terms of team rooms and things like that. There's a bit more around code analysis and code reviews and so on, and starting work and completing work and so on around that. But the team room's really cool. And then the development process, we ran through actually doing some tasks and checking them in and having that visibility. And then there's the testing tools, deployment, which we'll look at in the Azure talk, and some monitoring. One thing that I forgot to show you, which I'll just show you now, is back in our code. I mentioned before that you can see all the items that are here, and then you can see your change sets as well. So let's have a look at this change set, the added image and text, and we can see what was changed. But not only can we see what was changed, we can see, we can do a comparison of the two files. And this is not in Visual Studio. This is, not in Visual Studio. This is online. So we can do this comparison, see what's actually changed, which is amazing, incredible that you can do this in the web. Anyway, so that's really cool. You don't need Visual Studio to have a look at what's actually changed. So that's really cool, yeah. So there you go. We've gone through all of these things. I've had a look at Visual Studio Online. If you're sitting with your code just on your computer at the moment, I would strongly encourage using something like this. Particularly the Agile management tools. It's a fantastic way of looking at how your project is running and making sure that you're getting things right and doing your work properly. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ping me on email or something like that. And with that, that's all. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on the Dev Superpowers.